Okay, I think it's okay for us to begin. I'm starting to see the numbers; they're still going up, but I do want to begin and try to begin as on time as possible. So we have several hundred attendees at this point, and I'm sure that that number will continue to grow, and we'll try to move it at a reasonable pace. I really appreciate everyone making the time to be here. Thank you so much. I know how busy the summer months can be, and I appreciate you taking the time to attend this evening. There is a Q&A feature. I'm just going to ask that you wait until the end for the Q&A feature, because throughout the course of the presentation, I anticipate answering many of the questions that at least have been directed to me and that have been asked thus far. I've seen so many members of our community and have engaged so many people in conversation. So I would just ask that you wait until the end to use the Q&A feature. I know some people are participating from vacation or remote locations. I appreciate you being part of tonight's call. So without further ado, I just want to begin with just a reminder on this next slide that schools are set to open on September 9th. So there has been some information that has been asked of me, or questions that have been asked as to whether there's a delay to the start of the school year. That's absolutely not the case. I'm not quite sure where that originated. Someone asked me the other day, did you hear that they were going to delay the schools? And I am they, and no, I have not heard that one yet. We are opening, we're on time, September 9th. We're really looking forward to welcoming our students back and our staff back. We have made a really solid commitment to a safe reopening of schools. We want your students back. We want you to feel comfortable returning your students to us. We understand that there are uncertain times. We understand that you have concerns, and concerns that run beyond COVID. We're sensitive to that. We're attentive to that. And in terms of some of our work this summer, outside of addressing the technical aspect of COVID, there's a social emotional component to the return to school that we're aware of. There's a mental health component that we're aware of. We have some students who have not been in our school building in over 18 months. They elected a fully remote model last year, and which is terrific. We were pleased to offer that this past year. And we understand some of the challenges that our children will face coming back to school, whether they're 4 years old and starting kindergarten for the first time, or whether they're 18 years old and they're wrapping up a 13-year career here in the district. We acknowledge the different needs. We've made substantial investments in our staff. We've made investments in our clinical staff and bringing in some additional support this year. I shared that at the July 12th board meeting, that we were going to use some of the federal stimulus grant monies to really focus in on some additional social, emotional, and mental health support. I've been in communication actually over these past several days with several members of our clinical staff. And the one thing that I heard time and time again is that the children need to be back in school, and they need to be back in school every day. And that was something that really came through each conversation. We hear that, we know that. And in addition to being in school, we need to make sure that we have supports available for your children. So we will support your children. We have invested in some additional staff supports, whether it's on the social, emotional, or clinical side, or whether it's on the academic side. We have invested in additional support in our school district, and those investments span all of our schools in some capacity or another. It's not every area and every school. So if we can go back to the previous slide, please. Yep. One more. Yep, that's good. So we get that, we understand that, and it's something that we're committed to. So we know this reopening is not physically just about reopening the doors to our schools. I think you trust that we understand that. And I think some of the areas that we prioritized in our budgeting and with the stimulus monies that were allocated to the school district will reflect that. With regard to just some of the additional items for the reopening of school, and we'll just stay on this slide for a moment. I wanted to share that we've looked at a lot of the academic data. We're encouraged actually by what we've seen from our students and from the end of last year. We offered a great summer program this past school year, and it went very, very well. We offered a summer reading program, a summer E&L program, an extended school year program. I thank Mrs. O'Shea, who really led that effort in providing those opportunities for our students. I thank the staff who decided that, hey, after the year we had, what better thing to do than to come in and work again over the summer and support our students. So I really admire the staff who committed, and certainly Mrs. O'Shea for her leadership. With tonight's presentation, I had a full presentation ready to talk about masks and quarantines and some of the other topics that have come to my attention, some of the questions that are circulating. I'm sure some questions that have made their way to me, whether it's on the athletic fields or whether it's in town and the community. And then one press conference at 3 o'clock can upend a presentation, and then you find yourself at 4 o'clock amending a presentation that you've worked for the past week on. So last summer, we were a little concerned because we received guidance on August 7th. If that were the case, I'd be a happier person than I am today. If we had full guidance on August 7th of this year, I'd be a lot more encouraged, a lot more happy with the communication from the state. So at this point, just this afternoon, we heard the governor give a press conference and announcing that masks are going to be required in school. So we can go to the next slide, Jen. That press release was issued today. We received it. I haven't had the opportunity. I've just been in meetings all afternoon and have not had the opportunity to view the press conference, but I've seen some of the news feeds and have seen some of the information that's being circulated. There has been no written guidance to schools. I just want to clarify that. There was an announcement at a press conference, is my understanding. So more information to come on that. With regard to the masking, the governor has said it on numerous occasions that masking would be something that would be a statewide matter. So on the next slide, what you'll see is, here's what I know now. I don't have all of the answers for you at this point. The announcement came about 4 hours ago. We haven't seen anything in writing yet out of the governor's office, so we'll see where that goes. Face masks we know are going to be required indoors and on the school bus. The school bus is actually beyond the governor. That's a CDC order. We know that face masks are not going to be required outdoors, and I don't know the language on medical exemptions. There are some students who don't do well in masks, who have medical concerns with wearing masks, and we're sensitive to that. We absolutely are sensitive to that. We understand that. And as with last year, there was a medical exemption, and we had students who qualified for that medical exemption. So I don't have the details on the medical exemption at this point. We're awaiting written guidance. Once we receive that, we'll be sure to communicate that out. But I have not seen that. In fact, there was no mention made of a medical exemption. However, if the New York State Department of Health is going to follow the lead of the CDC and AAP, then I would venture to conclude that there will be some kind of medical exemption, because I think there needs to be some kind of recognition for some of the concerns that with some students in wearing a mask, which we certainly understand. With that regard, in terms of vaccinations, we haven't seen what the requirement will be. We as a school district do not require that everybody be vaccinated. That would come from the state. So the State Department of Health would issue some kind of order to the school districts. We'll have to review it, interpret it with our legal counsel, and make determinations from there. So again, the announcement's about 4 hours old. I wish it would have come earlier in the month. It would have given us a lot more time to prepare for the reopening of school. But we have the announcement today, and we'll certainly be prepared. But we are on target for a September 9th. I also want to, actually we can do that a little later. I do want to share just a quick word, and we can go to the next slide on this. I want to share just a quick word about quarantines. And actually more than a quick word, because quarantines are important. So many of us, and I think you all know a parent here in the district as well, 2 kids in the schools here. So many of us have received that call at 10:30 in the morning saying your child has been exposed, please come pick up your child. And that's not us. That is a Department of Health order that we're following, and we're required to follow those orders. Or your child has been exposed, whether it's in school or outside of school, and now they have to quarantine for 10 calendar days, which means that it's up to 8 school days that they're missing. Quarantines are something we need to avoid. We need to build a system that minimizes, and I think we have the capability of eliminating quarantines. I won't go that far and say that we're going to eliminate quarantines, but I do believe that what I'm going to share with you tonight will drastically reduce the number of quarantines. We've had some students quarantine 2, 3, and even 4 times. And that's something we just need to avoid. And we need to make sure that our systems in place can avoid that. We need our children in school. I think that's a universal agreement of everyone in our community. We want our children in school learning. And I assure you, no one wants our children in school learning more than I do. With regard to the new quarantine rules, and everything is starting to come together, and we've built a system that I believe will achieve that goal. And we've taken a lot of time to think about how we can construct classrooms, how we can construct lunch, how we can construct physical education, band, chorus, orchestra, so that we can provide that continuity of instruction to your children and to our staff. So on the next slide, I just want to share the new quarantine rules, and the new quarantine rules actually facilitate, and you'll recall earlier in the summer, I issued a letter to our school community. It was actually earlier in August, when the state DOH told us to follow the CDC and the Westchester County Department of Health. But at the time, the 2 entities had very different quarantine rules, and they didn't quite make sense. They didn't make sense to me. They didn't make sense to a whole lot of people. And when you tell a school district to follow 2 organizations that have very different rules, you put them in a position of not having many answers to a lot of questions. So it appears that the Westchester County Department of Health and CDC are now aligned in their recommendations for quarantines. And what that is going to do is reduce the number of quarantines that we're going to experience. I'll share with you, first, here's the big difference here in the quarantine rule is that they went from 10 minutes to 15 minutes. So that's a big deal. That may not seem like much, but those additional 5 minutes of time of exposure can be the difference between your child attending school without interruption or getting a phone call from the Department of Health or from the school indicating that your child has to remain home or quarantined for the next 10 calendar days. Now, they added, buried in the appendix of the guidance, this next bullet that speaks to the face masks. So there's an exception, and the exception speaks to, okay, so now forget about 6 feet. If a child is 3 to 6 feet apart from another individual and both children are wearing masks, then only the child who has COVID would quarantine. The other child may continue in school uninterrupted. Certainly, we'll monitor symptoms and we'll alert you to monitor symptoms, but the child can remain in school for those days and not have to quarantine. Should symptoms develop, then certainly they'll remain home because they're ill. I just want to share, because there has been some misunderstanding of the quarantine rules that I've heard that have been shared with me. So if Mrs. O'Shea and I are sitting in a classroom and we're 3 feet apart, if we both have masks on and we're 3 feet apart, even if we're 6 feet apart or 5 feet apart, if we're within 6 feet of each other, and our desks are going to be 3 feet apart. I'll share that with you a little later in the presentation. If I have COVID and I'm wearing a mask, and Mrs. O'Shea is sitting next to me, 3 feet away, and she is wearing a mask, I would go into isolation because I have COVID. I would be out of school. Mrs. O'Shea gets to come back the next day. If I have COVID in a classroom, I'm not wearing a mask, Mrs. O'Shea is sitting next to me 3 feet away, she does have a mask on, Mrs. O'Shea would still be required to quarantine. If Mrs. O'Shea was sitting 5 feet away from me, so not immediately next to me, but one more student beyond me, I did not have a mask on and I contract COVID, Mrs. O'Shea does have a mask on, she would still be required to quarantine under the rules that the CDC and the DOH have adopted. So we know the rules of quarantine going into the school year. So I just want to clarify that. In terms of, now, what does that mean? So we can go on to the next slide. If you would imagine that this is a class, 25 desks, everyone has a mask on, because irrespective of vaccination status, I believe the governor's order is going to require masks to be worn. So if you imagine just a class, 25 people in the class, if one of the students has COVID in the class, on the next slide, all of the students who have a red square or rectangle or square around them would have to quarantine under the current guidelines. If the student who has COVID is not wearing a mask, these are just the quarantine rules. It's not my opinion, it's not my perspective. These are the rules. Mind you, we had over 300 COVID cases, and for each one of those, I was directly involved. So I'll share with you, that is what is going to end up happening. Under the new quarantine rules and under the mask requirement, on the next slide, what you'll see is if this student comes down with COVID, the next slide will show you that the only student who quarantines is the child who has the virus. So those are just the quarantine rules. We know the rules going into the school year, and that's why we're configuring our desks in a way to try to minimize the disruption to learning. We want our children in school, and we want our children to remain in school. Now, moving, I just also, before we go to the next slide, quarantines cannot be overstated. The number of quarantines that we had in this district, we had over 3,000 quarantine absences. Obviously, we didn't have 3,000 children absent, but each child can account for 5, 6, 7, 8 absences with one event of quarantine. We had over 3,000 quarantine absences at our high school. We want that number to go way down. We want, and we believe that it will, with the new quarantine guidelines, with the mask being when you put those together, because the quarantine guidelines speak directly to both children wearing a mask to avoid quarantine. I believe the number will go way, way down. This is one example. So this is just illustrative of what we anticipate will happen. On the next slide, I do want to share with you that there will be possibilities for quarantine. So I don't believe in the classroom setting that we will have many quarantines that arise. However, the school bus, if your child is sharing a bench with another child on a school bus, they're within 3 feet, irrespective of masks, and masks are required on the school bus. Irrespective of the masks, there would be quarantines in that instance. Minimal, but there would be quarantines in that instance. There are certain small group instructional or related services that may, if there are students who are sitting closer than 3 feet for 15 minutes or more, there's a possibility. It's a small possibility, but it's a possibility. And I honestly, I just want to be transparent with you, and I want to be upfront with you. And I should have said this at the start. Not all of the information that I'm going to share with you will you agree with. Not all of the information that I share with you will be pleasant to hear. It's never fun to talk about requiring a student to stay out of school. It's never fun to have some of the conversations that we're having right now, but I do want to always be transparent and upfront with you. I tell you that I believe quarantines are going to be reduced drastically. My goal is that we don't have any, but in reality, we will have some. And here are the areas of exposure that we have. There might be some athletic activities that will require a quarantine. I don't know. We call the Department of Health. We engage them in a conversation. We frame the circumstances for them. We answer whatever questions they have, and they make a determination. I will always advocate for your children, and I will always advocate that they stay in school. But we as a school district don't make quarantine determinations. So I just want to be clear on that. And then out of school exposure, though, please understand, and I trust you know, we don't have control over out of school exposure. So if your child goes to a birthday party or a play date or some other social event, a family function, and there's an exposure there, the Department of Health will notify us. They'll want you to quarantine, and that's outside of our control. But I just want to be upfront that there's a potential for quarantine for circumstances that don't even reside within the school. On the next slide, I just want to talk about some additional health and safety measures. One thing you'll notice, and I'm not going to read all of the slides, all of the bullets here on the slides, but many of these the children won't see. So we talk about this idea of trying to go back to normal. We disinfect our school buildings between the hours of about 4 and 11 p.m. That's when we start the disinfection, once the children are out of the building. And generally most staff, not all staff, but most staff are out of the building, we begin disinfecting. The children will not see that. The high touch surfaces that are being disinfected multiple times a day, the children generally don't see that. We disinfect the school buses every night, and our transportation contractor does that. And they've been phenomenal. If you think back a year ago at this time, our contract with our new transportation provider was only about a week old. They were short on drivers, short on vehicles, and they really ramped up their operation to meet our needs. And they, I would say by the time we hit mid-October and beyond, they were doing a really extraordinary job. And now to have them ready to start another school year and in place, and they're fully staffed, and they have great vehicles that they're operating, we're excited to have them as a partner, and they'll disinfect the buses each day. And the most important measure that I have heard with regard to mitigation techniques are the ventilation. And that's something we take a lot of pride in and have invested heavily in. So we do, I won't rehash the ventilation conversation because I've spoken at length about the ventilation. We have the unit ventilators in addition to the HVAC system, in addition to the windows as well being open. So there are multiple sources. We have about 5 to 7 air changes per hour. So every 5 to 7.5 minutes, we have an air change in a classroom. So over the course of a 40-minute period, there's several air changes that happen within the classroom. That's essentially introducing the volume of air of the classroom to displace the air in there. So we have air changes every 5 to 7.5 minutes. And that's something that we certainly have invested in, and the ventilation is very important for us in our classrooms. And the vast majority of our classrooms at this point, the overwhelming majority, if not all of our homeroom classes, are air conditioned at this point. On the next slide, you'll see a few other measures that were taken. We have the rapid antigen testing. It's the Abbott Binax Now. Many families have actually taken us up on that. If you'd like your child to be tested, you can email the school nurse. The school nurse can coordinate the testing. It's free, it's on site, it's a shallow nasal swab. It goes not deep at all into the nose. The results are ready in 15 minutes. There's no cost. We can issue a printout, we report it to the state. We actually are a licensed lab. One of the things that we did last year to make sure that we could provide a testing service is we became licensed as a COVID testing laboratory in one of our buildings on the central administration part of the campus. has the capacity to conduct testing there. So it's free. It's only for current students and staff. So anyone who's not a student or an employee in the district is not eligible for the testing. But if you'd like your child to be tested, it's free. It's on site. It's a rapid test. We also are participating in a grant program with Westchester County's Department of Health for free saliva-based PCR testing. So anyone who has ever gone for a PCR test knows that it's a very deep nasopharyngeal swab and it goes pretty far up into your nose. This is a saliva-based test. So essentially you're spitting into a vial, it's going to a laboratory and the results are returned 24 to 48 hours, in 24 to 48 hours. We're going to have our COVID dashboard up. We want to be as transparent with our community as possible. As cases arise, and cases will arise, make no mistake, cases are going to arise in our schools. As they arise, each day we're going to update our dashboard. I don't know if the state is going to continue to operate their dashboard. In truth, the state's dashboard was flawed from day one. It wasn't current, it wasn't accurate, it didn't always reflect the uploads that we made each day. Our website, and it's very prominently placed on our website, it's on the homepage under the Good to Know on the right side of our webpage. It has our COVID dashboard. So it's there, it's available to you to view. It's not up and running. It'll be up and running once school returns, but it will be there for your review. And we're going to share every case with you. I will not be sending out a letter for every single COVID case that happens. There will be notifications in specific classes with specific contacts, but I will not send out a district-wide letter for every single COVID case that happens. If you'd like, you can go on to our webpage, 9 a.m. every morning. The website will be updated. You can see the data longitudinally. You can go back in time. You can go across the schools. You can see the aggregates. It will all be there for you. Limited field trips, limited indoor events, large group indoor events. We want to keep our eye on what's most important. And what's most important is keeping our children in school, keeping our staff well and in school and not quarantined. So we are going to make sure that we invest every effort into achieving that goal. So we're going to limit field trips for now. We're going to limit large group indoor events for now. I don't know what the late fall will bring. I don't know what the winter will bring. So I probably should have prefaced everything I say with "at this time," because it's such a fluid situation and it seems to change. My presentation would have looked very differently had I given this presentation 5 hours ago. So I just want to share that, and I think our community appreciates and understands the fluidity of the situation and our ability to quickly adapt to any and all changes. On the next slide, there are just some additional health and safety measures that we're taking. That easy screen application, we're no longer going to require at this time. So it was that daily screener. Some had the app, some visited the website. The truth of the matter is the effort that was invested didn't really result in us identifying additional COVID cases that we would not have known of otherwise. So there really wasn't enough benefit and value added for that program to continue at this time. Should we determine that we need to reinstitute it, we will institute the daily health screening. At this time, there will be no expectation that a daily health screening is required. So at this point, honestly, the daily health screening didn't result in us identifying one case across the school district. Didn't help at all. We identified cases through other ways. In terms of the temperature checks, again, there was just not much of an added benefit to the temperature. Fever, we actually noticed, wasn't even one of the primary signs of COVID. Fever came on a little later, so the temperature checks really didn't add much value to us. Again, we took temperatures of every student every day, and it didn't result in the identification of COVID cases. So as we look at the data, not so much, well, gee, it's good optics or it'll make us feel better to take a temperature. What works? Let's do what works, and let's focus our efforts on what works. As of right now, we really hadn't seen much of a benefit on the health screenings and the temperature checks. Arrival and dismissal, that question has come up. How will arrival, how will dismissal look? It'll look very similar to the way it looked last school year. We anticipate a higher volume of drop-offs and pickups by car as opposed to bus. Not quite as high as last year, but what I'm sharing with you tonight may lead you to wonder, gee, if the exposure is on the bus and we know that there won't be a quarantine while in school, is there really a, can we look at alternatives? The bus will be there, the bus will be available, but I just share with you that we're anticipating higher volume. So again, I'm going to ask for your patience. I'm going to ask for your kindness in the parking lot and just following the speed rules. Please understand that we have young children on our campus and we want everyone to be safe. So please follow the personnel outside directing traffic, and also please follow just as minimal speeds as possible through our parking lots, just for the safety of our students and staff and each other and all of us. On the next slide, just a few other things. The sign, we had signage on our corridor floors reminding children to social distance and so on. We think it's time that we can remove those. Again, if we're talking about getting our children back to normal, I understand that they'll have masks on. But the signage is just another reminder that things are not normal. So we wanted to kind of evolve our practice beyond the signage. And we're confident that we can continue to operate the building. We're going to go back to lockers at the middle school and high school. There'll be some limited use, some restrictions on the use of lockers, but we're going to go back to locker use, middle school, high school. The free lunch, I want to remind parents of that. Lunch will be in the cafeterias. There is a free lunch program through the USDA that continues into this school year. I've been working with our food service provider to talk about some different options. What I've heard from children and from parents this summer has really had me reflecting on our menus and making sure that we offer menu options that our children will take advantage of. So I understand the nachos are popular and the breakfast for lunch is always very popular. And one of the questions, honestly, I had an 8-year-old child come up to me at Granite Knolls and say, grass-fed beef, is there grass in that? And I said, no. Well, what is that? And I said, I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to explain to you what grass-fed beef is, but we're talking about having pasta and meatballs on the menu going forward. So these are some of the conversations that we're having. We're trying to be as attuned to our students' needs as possible. So we will reconvene with the cafeterias. But again, so we're going to have lunch in the cafeteria, but the children will be spaced out by 6 or more feet in the cafeteria. So there will be distancing and there will be the ventilation systems that are going in the cafeteria during the time that they're not masked while they're eating. And then when they're outside, of course, the masks are optional. So if you'd like your child to wear their mask, they're welcome to. If you'd like your child to take their mask off, they may do so. You can just let them know to take their mask off when they go outside. On the next slide, just a few other items. So in the classroom, I talked about distancing. 3 feet actually has been more or less an industry standard. So when we say distancing of 3 feet, we're in substance reiterating what the standard has been. So as we walk, as if we create a classroom with rows and columns with aisles to walk through, the students are about 3 feet apart. If you take 2 desks and put them together, or if you add a 3rd desk to triangulate the desks, they're still 3 feet apart, even at a kindergarten table with children sitting at the same table. I was actually in a kindergarten classroom measuring chairs and distances from chairs at a table yesterday. The children are at least 3 feet apart in these situations. So I just wanted to share that. So even with the customary seating that we've had historically, 3 feet of distance between the children is more common. 6 feet in the activities mentioned there. The student desk barriers, I think we all know that I wasn't a fan of them from the start. We purchased good barriers. We have them here. I haven't read the guidance from the state, so I'm hoping that they don't call for barriers. At this time, we have no intent of using those barriers this year, but we'll review the guidance from the state once it comes out. If they do require barriers, we'll have them. But the barriers, actually, there's a conversation about airflow. They'll stop large particles, and you'll see that happen with students wearing a mask. That will help with the larger particles. But the barriers, actually, there's an argument that they inhibit airflow and restrict ventilation. So that we won't be using the barriers. And all of the discussion points here I want to share with you are made in consultation with our medical director. I haven't mentioned our medical director once, but he is once this evening. But Dr. Corsaro is absolutely phenomenal and is just such a resource and wealth of information to us. He works with 13 or 14 school districts in the region and provides really sound advice. So every single suggestion here has been discussed thoroughly with our medical director for his expertise and his input. And ultimately, he has two goals. He wants your children healthy, and he wants your children back in school, enjoying school, and with as normal of an atmosphere as possible. And I think his recommendations reflect that. So on the next slide, we'll see that there are clubs, middle school and high school, those will continue in person. There was guidance that was issued by the state education department suggesting, recommending, advising school districts to cancel high-risk sports unless everyone was vaccinated. I was a strong advocate of sports, high-risk sports, when it came to last winter. And it wasn't about the athletics. Our children need to participate in whatever outlet they have in our schools, whether it's athletics, whether it's band, orchestra, chorus, drama, dance, whatever the outlet is. We should be offering that to them. So the idea of canceling high-risk sports is not one that I'll entertain. We can find a way to make sports happen safely. So I appreciate the recommendation. It was helpful to review the recommendation. I actually appreciate the state education department stepping up when the New York State Department of Health decided that they didn't want to issue school guidance. So I appreciate their recommendation. We were able to make sports happen last year. Our teams that lost the end of their seasons had nothing to do with in-school transmission. There was no in-school transmission. So in that regard, was there in-school transmission throughout the course of the 180 days last year? I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was. To what extent? It was very minimal. Very, very minimal. I just want to be honest and open with you. We are going to make athletics happen. Athletics has begun. We're practicing very safe protocols. When our children are indoors, they're wearing masks. When they're outdoors, the masks are optional. There are sanitization protocols. There are other safety protocols that we have in place. We made it happen last year, and we can make it happen again this year. So we're going to continue with our athletics. I'll look forward to the state's guidance. Obviously, we'll respect and honor the guidance that comes forward from the state, but our children need these activities. So many of our students have lost, whether it was a performance that they were supposed to put on for their families and for the school community, band, orchestra, dance, the theater program. We had some wonderful virtual theatrical productions, but I'd like to see our children back on the stage. In athletics, we've had students lose, in some instances, 1 or 2 seasons or parts of 2 seasons. I don't want there to be a third. So I believe we can make this happen. Of course, our students know that they have to make responsible choices, and I trust that they will do that. Moving forward onto the next slide, just a couple more updates for you, and then we're actually wrapping up. Students with COVID who are required to quarantine will be provided virtual instruction. So we understand, first of all, that there are students who are medically fragile and won't be able to return to school. We will work with you. Please contact your child school nurse. We absolutely will work with you. So although we're not offering a remote option, we're not offering a hybrid option, we will absolutely work with children who are medically fragile and make sure that we provide support. For students who are on a short-term absence, whether it's contracting COVID or whether it's a quarantine, one of those two, there will be virtual instruction that's provided. It will look differently K-5 as it does 6-12. More information will follow on that. In terms of, and we're still just working out some of the details. In terms of class assignments and schedules, this is unrelated to COVID, but it is related to our reopening. We've been receiving questions, when will class replacements come out? When will schedules come out at the high school level? Class schedules will come out, I believe it's Thursday afternoon, late in the day. And for everyone else, K-8 schedules will come out, I believe, Friday afternoon. So you can look out for our portal late in the afternoon, Thursday high school, Friday for K-8. And essentially, those are the questions that, that is the presentation that I wanted to share with you. I hope it was helpful. I hope you found the information somewhat valuable to you. With regard to some of the questions, I see that the question and answer document has populated, so we're just going to stop the screen share. We'll go into some of the questions that you have, and we'll absolutely, if we can't address them tonight, we'll make sure that we follow up with you. So I do want to share that one of the questions that I'm seeing here is vaccination. What percentage of the staff are vaccinated? At the time of last check, which is now a few months ago, we had about 75 to 80% of faculty and staff vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So I anticipate that that number has grown beyond 75 to 80%. I believe we're beyond 80%, but I have not confirmed that at this point. In terms of are masks required for vaccinated students as well, I have not reviewed the guidance from the governor. However, based on the language that was used today, I anticipate the answer to be yes. Masks are going to be required for all students and staff and anyone entering our buildings, irrespective of vaccination status. Question about some of the staff being added. Ms. O'Shea, I'm not sure if you're able to speak to some of the staff that we've added. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
I should know better by now. Yes, we did add 2 social work positions. These are not replacements. These are additional positions to the district at the middle school and high school level. We also added a psychologist to support the social emotional behavioral needs at the K-5 level. We added 3 special education teachers to support students K-12, depending on the needed program that we had added. And we also added a new reading teacher, and this is all to support the academic and social needs of students moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. O'Shea. With regard to one of the next questions, how we protect kids with masks from those who don't wear masks. Well, part of the requirement is that children are wearing masks. There are some students who are not able to tolerate a mask, and it was similar to the case last year, where similar cases last year where there were some students who weren't able to wear a mask, and we worked with their physician, worked with our medical director to ensure that we were providing the safest possible atmosphere. But there were other mitigation measures that I mentioned later in the presentation. As I look at the timestamp on this question, I believe it was asked prior, so I'm sure that some of the mitigation measures that I shared, I would just be reiterating that to answer the question. In terms of how will I ensure that parents don't send kids to school who are positive, our community has been terrific. In truth, our community has been wonderful. They have been in communication with us. I think there's this reflection and this sentiment that we are working through this together and we all have a common goal, and that's to keep our school buildings open. So the communication between parents and our health offices and parents have been remarkable. So we have not intentionally seen someone sending a sick child to school. Is it possible that there was an asymptomatic child in school while somebody in the family was being tested? Yes, and I would ask again, and I'll reiterate the point, if someone in the household is awaiting COVID testing and they're symptomatic, this is not just I get tested every week for work. If someone in the household is awaiting the results of COVID tests and they're symptomatic, please keep the children home until you have the results back. Because the reality is that generally from our experience in the school, and we have a pretty wide sample set at this point, from our experience in the school, if one member of the household contracts COVID, by and large, it's not a universal rule, but by and large, the other members of the household will also contract COVID. And then that sets up the situation for quarantines. And our community really has been great about that. As I think about the number of instances when that occurred, they were minimal. They were minimal, but it did occur, in truth. One question here is, would a student need to quarantine as per the new rules if they're vaccinated? The answer to that is no. A fully vaccinated student or adult, a fully vaccinated individual, and that's defined by 2 or more weeks beyond the final dose of the vaccine, would not need to be quarantined. We would report their name to the Department of Health because we're required to do so, and they would immediately be removed from the quarantine list. And provided that they're not symptomatic, they'd be able to return to school, and obviously in a mask, but the mask would be required anyway. So there's a question here. If you speak to if and when testing is required, will YCSD perform COVID testing? Again, I think this question was asked prior. At this time, testing's optional. Testing's optional. It's not required. It's a service that we're offering to our faculty, staff, and students. We can't open the service to anyone beyond faculty, staff, and students. Our insurance carrier will not allow for that, nor does our license allow for that. So it's optional. There will be a parental consent. We will not test your child without you knowing about it. There's a parental consent piece here moving forward that will be in place. And we can certainly, and we will certainly send out more details. I have not seen the contract from the county at this point. We've had several meetings to discuss the COVID testing. The rapid testing is here. That's happened. We have many families who have had that experience in our school district, and I think all of the experiences have been positive ones. So we'll continue to offer the rapid testing. I have not seen all of the details on the PCR saliva-based testing at this time. Okay. Putting over kids in a small room all day wearing face masks, the Delta is very contagious. So there's a question about Delta being contagious. Again, I think this question was asked a few companies are able to keep employees at a 6 feet distance with masks who are vaccinated, but the schools are putting over kids in a small room all day. So our classrooms are 750 square feet. We actually have reduced class sizes in most instances. And our ventilation is something I'm very proud of, and I'm not sure if that exists in many places, and individuals are masked. And that's where we are. So if the question is keep people 6 feet apart, if we were to keep 6 feet apart, we would be hybrid. We saw how that worked last year. So if the rule was 6 feet of distance, then it's an A day, B day situation. And I don't think any of us want to go back to that. So there's a question about snack. So our snack period has been shortened. So it doesn't meet the criteria for quarantine because we don't have the time constraint. And in the cafeteria, the children are more than 6 feet apart. So in a space that large with ventilation in place, the quarantines don't come into play. So I hope I adequately answered the question, but if I did not, please let me know and I'm happy to answer. Is a child near my child, if a child near my child has COVID, they're both wearing a mask, but it makes me uncomfortable for my child to go in, let's say for a week, is there a process for quarantined or opted quarantine? There's a process for children who are quarantined as a result of exposure. And that's a DOH quarantine. There will be instructions. Somebody who wants to make a determination to keep their child out of school, that would not fit our requirement for remote learning and remote instruction. And there are so many reasons why we have been asked for remote learning, whether it's a vacation, whether it's a concern, whether it's a college visit or some other reason for an absence. We'll provide the remote learning as we have, and we're moving back into a more normal environment. We're going to provide remote learning for students who have COVID or who have been quarantined as a result of COVID exposure by the Department of Health. With regard to recess, They could and would be within 3 to 6 feet, playing for 30 to 60 minutes. So they're 20 minutes, and it's actually less than 20 minutes outside during recess. By the time there's a transition, there's about 20 minutes outside. And the children are outdoors in the open air. So the masks are optional. Your child's welcome to wear a mask, but we have not quarantined children, even last year, with the more strict quarantine rules and working with the Department of Health. And they take a very careful approach to their quarantines. The recess periods have not resulted in quarantines in any instance last year. An indoor recess may be a different conversation because now the children are indoors. Isn't everyone required to wear a mask? Yes. So the question is everyone required to wear a mask? Yes. The answer is yes. There are going to be, I'm sure, some medical exemptions. They're very few. They're not, I just want to be clear on that. The medical exemptions are very few. We have, at this point, we've received requests, I don't think for any. We know that there are some just based on last year's requests that I assume would carry over, but there aren't many, and all staff would be wearing masks. If a child is exposed in the classroom to another COVID positive student and both are wearing masks, will the parents of the exposed child be notified of the possible exposure? Yes, there will be a notification system that we put into place. Will remote learning be offered an option for quarantine? Yes, I do believe that I addressed that. Will windows be kept open as often as possible? Yes, that's true, both in the classroom and on the school bus as well, where we have a minimum number of windows that have to be open on the school bus. So, Mr. Graham, thank you. I see your comment there. I appreciate the kind words. Capacity limits on school bus still be in place? And the answer is no, in terms of capacity limits on the school bus. So that's where my wondering comes in about quarantine rules. What I would encourage your child to do is to sit at an open window seat, any vacant window seat, because that creates the most distance across the aisle. So even if the other child is sitting in an aisle seat across the way, there's still more than 3 feet of distance. I actually have physically been on a bus measuring distances between benches and between seats on the school bus. So we're not able to impose, and we didn't have a capacity restriction last school year either. It just worked out naturally that so many families decided to transport their child by car each morning or coordinate transportation by car. So there wasn't a capacity restriction last year, and there will not be a capacity restriction. So some buses, so the buses that go to and from daycare are a little bit more crowded than some of the other buses that we have that come in less crowded, but that is not a restriction that we'll put in place at this time, and that would essentially result in us increasing the bus fleet, which is something we're not in a position to do. Has to provide options. Okay, thank you. I appreciate, I see the questions here and some of the comments that are, so there's a question here about masks and they don't work, and I appreciate that. I've received studies from different parents, some saying masks need to be worn, some say that masks aren't effective. As I looked at our data, absences due to illness for the last 3 years, both in February and May, controlling for quarantines, I did notice that our absence numbers this past year, absence due to illness, were lower. They were less. Anecdotally, and speaking to our nurses, we knew that flu cases, strep throat cases, stomach bug cases, and other respiratory virus cases were down in our school district, and that's just anecdotal data that we have prepared that I can certainly post to our website. Will we still be required to complete Easy Screen? I believe I addressed that. The short answer is no. There haven't been enough. There just hasn't been enough return on that investment of work and time and expectation. And what we found was our nurses were spending so much time during the school day following up with people who missed the Easy Screen that it was taking them away from their time with children. So that is where we are. If we do determine that we need to reinstate the Easy Screen, we will. We'll be able to pivot. We do have the subscription. We have it active. We're ready to go. we're going to make the determination at this time not to move forward with the Easy Screen. Will there be, I'm sorry, there's a question here. CDC previously stated if a person is vaccinated, exposed to a COVID positive person, there's no need to quarantine. That is part of the school, and I believe I clarified that a little later. So if somebody is vaccinated, they are not required to quarantine. So because individuals are going to be wearing masks in the classroom, I'm not anticipating there being many quarantines as it is. Now, if there is a case in the classroom, it's most likely that the individual student who has COVID, that person will be excluded from school for the next 10 calendar days. I don't anticipate many other students joining them because of the new quarantine rules and the masks being worn in school. And those two go hand in hand, which is why we needed that guidance from the CDC and the Department of Health. So that is true. If somebody is previously and fully vaccinated, they are not required to quarantine, provided that they're not symptomatic. Will there be early dismissal days for conferences at the elementary level this year? The answer is yes. I just don't have those dates with me right now, but we'll make sure that we do follow up. Back to school nights, could anything be held outdoors? Outdoors really isn't an option because it happens in the evening and at the time that we're having these events. And there's a technology component that comes with this. So there really isn't much of an outdoor option. So we are still looking at back to school nights. More information will follow on that. In terms of the vaccinations, I addressed that a little earlier in the presentation. Do students have to quarantine if they leave the country for a vacation? I have not seen that at this point, so I don't believe that to be the case. What are the procedures to maintain the proper distancing during some of the related services that the students are receiving? And we're trying to maximize distance as best we can, but that is an area in some small instances where we're not able to fully socially distance for that 15 minutes, 3 feet. There is potential for there to be a quarantine. I just want to be transparent. I think it's a very low possibility, but I would never want to say that it can never happen. Is the free lunch program for everyone, or do I need to apply to see if my child is approved? The free lunch program is for everyone. Every single child in the district is eligible. Every single child is already enrolled in the program. So you can choose to, there was no enrollment, I should say, they're not enrolled, there was no formal enrollment. Your child would, so you'll print out the menu, and it reminds me, please check the menu frequently. And in working with our food service director, actually in a conversation that we had last week, there are supply chain issues that they're experiencing. So there may be some changes to the menu. And I know if your children are like my children, they'll agree to something on the menu. And if that's substituted, we're not going to have lunch. It's the bagel option that they'll get that day, or something else. So please do check the menu often. Your children are eligible. Every child is eligible for the program. It's one lunch. So at the high school level, we do get sometimes some children wanting to have 2 lunches. It's your first lunch, and it's 1 lunch a day that's included. So you are able to send your child in. They'll place their lunch order, and their account just won't be charged. If they buy snacks, if they buy additional drinks, then obviously they'll be charged for the snacks or for the drink, but the school lunch is at no cost. There are no forms to fill out. There's no paperwork to complete. You just send your child in with knowing what they'd like to have for lunch that day. They would place their lunch order, and their account won't be charged. Will there be snow days? Yes, there will be snow days. However, there's always a however here, that pilot program of remote days on snow days have continued. So yes, there will be snow days. However, if we have a bad winter and the number of snow days has now the potential to impact a school recess period, where we're going to have to cut into one of our breaks to make up the time, we're going to really give a lot of thought to having a remote day in lieu of a snow day after we've exhausted snow days to the point where now we're looking at making up school days and a break. We want to keep those breaks intact for families. I know there are travel plans that families are making, that our staff are making. We want to be respectful of that. So yes, we'll have snow days. How many? Will we have any remote days of snow days? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how mild or how snowy the winter will be. And just going down, trying to get to as many of the questions. We have about 96 questions here, and some are comments. If a family needs to pick up a student, are they required to show proof of vaccination? No, they are not required to show proof of vaccination. If we talked about a vaccination, and many of these are repeats. So there's a question about if a child is vaccinated. We've talked about that. Can the schedules come out earlier? There's a lot that goes into the rollover. We'd love to have the schedules out as early as possible. There's questions about teacher assignments and student schedules. Can that come out earlier? There is so much data. There are hundreds of reports that have to go along with our year-end closeout. So our fiscal year begins July 1st. So what we're doing during the month of July is we're closing out June. We're closing out the previous school year. We're submitting so many reports to the state. We're building a new schedule into our database. There are a lot of moving parts here, and we try to get the information out as early as we can. Yeah, our children, this is a great question. Will the children in elementary schools, K-3, be able to engage in group activities? That's the hope. That absolutely is the hope. We want to try to get back to the pedagogy that we know is effective in early childhood. And part of that is group work. And we want to do it in a safe and responsible way. And we want to do it in a way that will not subject a child to quarantine. Will there be mask breaks? Yes, I anticipate there being mask breaks. This is still new. I want to share that with you. The guidance is about 5 hours old, and I haven't read it. Nothing written has been sent to us. So yes, there will be. To what extent, I'm just not in a position to speak at this point. Can students eat lunch outdoors, K-8, weather permitting? Those are some of the things that we're looking at. We're looking at outdoor spaces. We're looking at tent spaces. And we want to try to get the kids outdoors as much as possible. Not only do we want them to learn, we want them to play as well and really enjoy the school experience. Outdoors, we know they can remove their masks. So I like outdoors better than indoors. In terms of can the masks become optional later on in the school year? I sure hope so. I sure hope so. I hope that we're in a place where the numbers are where they are, and where they were actually just a month ago. Where the numbers were where they were a month ago. We were in a blue or yellow COVID transmission zone. We were given the option during the summer program to make masks optional. We did. We had a great summer. It wasn't a perfect summer. We did have to close down a classroom in our ESY program for 2 weeks, and that was very, very disappointing that we had to do that. So it wasn't perfect. It absolutely wasn't perfect, but I thought by and large it was a great experience, and we had no confirmed positive cases that resulted with the program. So that was a terrific thing. We have a kindergartner starting this year. First of all, welcome to our school district. You're going to love it here in Yorktown. I say that as a parent, a resident, and a father of 2 in this school district. So welcome to the Yorktown schools. What is outside time like as a way to mitigate time inside? So we have actually set up some outdoor classrooms. At the high school level, we have multiple outdoor spaces. At the middle school level, we have a nice large outdoor space that children utilize for recess. There's an outdoor space for band at the elementary schools. We have multiple playgrounds in our schools. Our children get to go outside. We have outdoor classrooms, reading areas where we can go out, and our teachers do a great job of getting our students outdoors to learn, to play, to explore the outdoors. So there will be opportunities to get our students outside. And I hope I adequately answered the question that was asked. The free lunch we've talked about, travel restrictions we've talked about. We talked about vaccinations for quarantined students. Ms. O'Reilly, thank you so much. I see the comment. I appreciate it. I just wanted to know that I see you here. I've answered the question on vaccinations. MERV 13 filters installed on window air conditioners in classrooms. The answer is yes. So are the MERV 13 filters installed? Yes, we actually bought the MERV 13 sheeting and we retrofitted our window units to have the MERV 13 filters. So yes, they do. And in our central air conditioning systems on the penthouse rooftops, we have the MERV 13 filters in a more customary fashion installed. Just to come back on the mask question, I just want to share. So my answer was, I hope so. So I hope that we can go to a mask optional environment at some point, because I think that would be reflective of the current situation in our community and in the region. At this point, we don't have the decision. The decision does not reside with the school district. That was taken away from us. So my answer that I hope we can get to a place where our children can be in school, and if they want to wear a mask, absolutely, that would be great. I hope we can get there. We're not there yet. And I just wanted to clarify that at this point, it is not the school district's decision to do that. I certainly understand the rationale behind it. It will certainly limit quarantines with the new quarantine guidelines coupled with the mask requirements. I get it. I just wanted to clarify that it's not going to be, I don't think it will be. I haven't read the guidance, but I don't think it will be my determination or the board's determination as to when we move forward. Snack will be inside of the classroom, yes, but it will not meet the requirements for quarantine. It will be well below that, just as it was last school year. Will you be able to find out if your child's teacher is vaccinated? No, that is someone's private medical information that will not be shared. Will parents be required to do temperature checks and report it to the school daily? No, the temperature checks are not required. You may choose to, but they're not required. Guidance that a vaccinated person, that I clarified that on the vaccinations and the quarantines. Will staff in the schools be required to vaccinate? I haven't seen the guidance at this point. The governor has made some kind of mention on vaccinations for school personnel. I just haven't seen the guidance at this point. Will a student need to submit the proof of vaccination? If they are looking to avoid quarantine, we would need proof of vaccination, correct? If a child gets ill after a dose of the vaccine, do you require that they stay out of school knowing the symptoms are directly linked to the vaccine? It's going to be based on the symptomology, or exposure previously. So that would be more of an individualized question that you'd want to have with the school nurse. I'm just going through some of the questions. We've answered so many of them. Any restrictions on the school bus other than masks as far as siblings having to sit together, limiting the number of kids, etc. So we would love for siblings to sit together. Honestly, that is probably one of your safest ways to avoid quarantining, is if your child is sitting with someone who they're either is in their family or they've been potting with. That may be honestly the safest approach on the school bus, is to sit next to someone in your household. How do I notify the school that my child is vaccinated? Please notify the school nurse. The school nurse will accept the vaccination information. Will the child have mask breaks between classes? Yes, to the greatest extent possible, without knowing what grade level your child is in. The answer is we are going to try to include as many mask breaks as we can, as we did this past school year. That was the same question. Is there going to be a prom? So great question. We had a prom last year. The goal is to have a prom this year, to have a great graduation. It feels like we just had graduation on our campuses, although the summer has gone quickly. It feels like we were just here having graduation ceremonies in person. So during our high school graduation, we had about 1,500 people on our campus outdoors, and it was wonderful. It was a great time in that the COVID numbers were so low. They were a fraction of what they are today. But my hope is that we'll get back there in this spring. So the intent is to give our seniors as memorable of a final year in our district as we can, and we're cognizant of that. So I'd have to see, there's a question here about the medical exemptions. What information will we require for mask exemption? We would need to see what the guidance reads, but ultimately if your child is not wearing a mask, there is a documented medical reason why they're not wearing a mask. So it's really not my place to tell you what that reason is. It would be a conversation with the child's physician to determine what their thoughts are and if they share the concern about wearing a mask. Outdoor celebrations, I'm going to hold off on answering because I don't know the answer to that at this point. Can we request our child only interact with vaccinated staff? I'm sorry, but no, you may not. Will visitors and parents be permitted in the building for various activities this year? We're going to start slow and hopefully work our way up to that. So we're going to have limited visitors in the building early on because we are not requesting the vaccination status of visitors at this point. We're not requesting additional information of visitors at this point. So we're going to start slow. Let's get the school year going. Let's get up and running. Let's get some continuity. Let's string together a nice long stretch of consecutive school days in person without interruption. Give our children that kind of that return to normal feeling that, oh, we're back. We're all back. And then we'll start to look more at these larger celebrations and inviting family members or guests into our schools at that point. For me, I want to get the school year up and running, and I want our kids back and ready to go. So I've addressed snack time and recess are cut down. No, snack time is what it was last year. Recess is what it has been always. So no, recess has not been reduced in terms of time. It's what it historically has been. So there was a concern about time for masks. No, that's where we've been. You reassure us that our children will be able to enjoy their year. So I love that question. Can I ensure you that your children will be able to enjoy their year? I love that question. My heart says yes, that I want them to, and I hope that they will, and I believe that they will have a great school year. Will there be bumps in the road? There absolutely will be bumps in the road. As I think about 2 school years ago, our children were fully remote, and that wasn't good for anyone. Think about last year, and we started the year in a hybrid model, A day, B day. It wasn't really good either. Last spring, we started to get back to normal. Things started to return. It was a great feeling. Our clinicians, who I've had some really great conversations with and some great emails with, have shared with me the difference that they've observed. Not so much about the masks, that really hadn't come to their attention in terms of concerns, but the biggest concerns were being in school every day and being with their friends. And that is where we are. And that's encouraging for us. And my belief is that it just gets better from here, but there will be bumps in the road. And I really hope that I have your confidence and that our school administrators and our administrative team has your confidence to know that we'll adapt to the bumps in the road. And at every step, we're going to be thoughtful in the decisions that we make, because nothing is more important than your children. So I do think it's going to be a great year. I'm optimistic, and time will tell. Time will tell. There will be bumps in the road. Make no mistake about it. I think we all know that there are going to be bumps in the road, and we'll address those and we'll get through those. So I see the worry. I see the concern. I see many of the comments here, and I get it. I completely understand it. And we're going to be working our absolute hardest. The entire organization will be working our absolutely hardest to serve your children and to make sure that they're safe and learning. In terms of just some of the questions, and I'm trying to, in terms of how many children at a lunch table, essentially they're 6 feet apart. So having been in our cafeteria, some of our cafeteria tables are of different length. So I don't know if I can tell you exactly that there will be 2 children to a table or 1 child to a desk, and their space 6 feet, each table is 6 feet apart. But they will be 6 feet apart. The barriers are down, so the obstructions are down, so that opportunity for social interaction, albeit distance, is there. And that is an important thing. And having been part of many of our lunch periods and having seen the way our lunch periods operate, I think the barriers coming down will be a big deal for our students while keeping them still distanced in a way that's safe enough, and keeping the ventilation so that we're moving the air in the room and diluting the air in the room, which is a study after study proves that that's effective. So someone's indicating that masks don't work. I appreciate it. There's someone here sending me a study that masks do work and masks are required, and we shouldn't think otherwise. So I appreciate it. I see both questions here. Not going to address them both, but I appreciate it. I address masks being required on the bus. Julie, thank you. I see that comment. Kristen, thank you. I see that. I'm using first names. I generally wouldn't. I would call you by your last name, but I don't want to acknowledge that. Thank you. I appreciate the comments. We're still working on conferences and making those determinations. PTA meetings, I'm really not at liberty to share with you the format of the PTA meetings moving forward. How is the nurse's office affected by potential COVID exposures? So there are 2 offices that we have, and there's an isolation room, or a care room, we call it, where suspected COVID cases are, and then all other, whether it's an injury or illnesses, would go to the nurse's office. So we do have a pretty a thoughtful system in place in our health offices. And I commend our nurses. Some are on this call. I really thank our nurses because they've done a great job. I literally have 2 comments back to back. Please have back to school night. Virtual back to school night would be fine. So I appreciate the different perspectives. We're going to work through some of the questions. Will there be bus monitors to make sure the kids keep their masks on? Some of our buses have bus monitors. Some do not have bus monitors on them. That is a $2 million proposition to outfit a 71 bus fleet with school monitors, and we have bus monitors on many of our not on many. We have bus monitors on about 1/3 of our buses, but we certainly don't have them on all of our buses. Yes, Big Buddy Day is still happening. That's September 9th at the high school. So the freshmen will come in on September 9th, 10th through 12th begin on the 10th. Do we anticipate school-wide assemblies being reinstated? I'll say possibly. I don't know if I can take a position on that right now as to whether we'd have school-wide assemblies. I shared that we've reduced class sizes already at the elementary school. There was a question about class sizes and whether we would consider reducing them. We have added some additional sections at the elementary level so that we can have class sizes that are modestly reduced. Will masks be required for the walkthroughs this week? Yes. Having not seen the guidance, what I would say the accurate conclusion would be masks indoors, masks optional outdoors. So masks indoors and on the bus, and masks optional outdoors. Homecoming, we're hoping to have a normal senior year. Me too. Me too, absolutely. So we want to have a normal senior year. We want to be able to have, honestly, as many events as we can, outdoors, certainly. Again, we're told that guidance is coming. We're on August 24th. The one promise that I'm going to make you is no matter what time I get that guidance, by 8 a.m. the following morning, it'll be read, reviewed, highlighted, and ready to go. So I would welcome the guidance tonight. I would assure you that in 12 hours from now, it'll be reviewed, and I'll be meeting with our team to discuss them and our doctor to discuss what they are. So we absolutely will go through, and I appreciate all of the questions and all of the perspectives. In terms of allergies, absolutely, all the allergy information. There's a question about allergies. The allergens are going to be noted on our school menu. So please do take a look at the school menu online. There's a more detailed school menu that has links that you can access online that will give you nutritional content and allergen information. In terms of snow day, I spoke about that. So there's a question about efficacy of masks. What are the deciding factor for you deciding on masks? I think I shared a little earlier that the decision on masks has not even come from the school district at this point. So that's where the decision came from. Beatrice, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate you as well. In regards to breakfast, no, we don't serve breakfast in the schools. Can a first grader bring their own lunch? Yes. All students are able to pack their own lunch if they wish. If things become worse, like the end of 2020 year, will there be remote offered with teachers teaching? I hope not. It's possible, but I hope not, that we don't go backwards in that regard. I hope that we continue to move forward. So is it possible? Yes, anything is possible. I'm optimistic that we don't get there. I apologize, I joined the meeting late, so masks will be required for all, not optional. Yes, there was an announcement at 3 p.m. this afternoon by the governor saying that there will be a masking requirement in all schools in New York State. All right. Yes, students will have to wear their masks while sitting at their desks. That was a question. Will students have to wear masks at their desks? Yes, the answer to that is yes. PTA, I'm not really at a point where I can speak on PTA events and the schedule of PTA events, so I apologize for that. I'm just trying to read as many. I see a family here new to the district. Welcome to Yorktown. You're going to love it here. I think I missed the part where you talked about lunch. Just to confirm, we do not have to fill out the lunch form this year. Correct. You do not have to fill out a lunch form this year. If your child wants the free lunch, they simply they'll place their lunch order. That generally, you're not going to get a form. Your child should just know what they're going to have the next day, what they'd like. The menu at the elementary level is fairly straightforward. There's one hot option and there's a cold option as well. So there's always a bagel that's offered each day, and then there's also a hot option that is offered. So the lunch menu will be that. If you wanted to send your child in with a note, if they're in, again, depending on the grade level, I don't know if I saw that, you can send them in with a note, and you are welcome to be able to have your child request whatever lunch, whether it's a note or whether they tell their teacher what they'd like, and when they go to the cafeteria, they'll be able to get their food. So the question is, are we having a preschool for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds? We don't have the physical space in our schools at this point to allow for a 3K and a pre-K, so that's not something that we're able to institute at this time. Guests coming into the school, yes, we're looking at guests coming into the schools. Masks during sports, yes. Indoors, masks will be required. Outdoors, masks will be required. What I'm going to try to do, just because the number of questions keeps continuing to increase, and that's terrific, I would tell you that I'll try to get back to you as quickly as we can. There are over 146 questions. I think we answered the majority of them, because now I'm starting to see repeats come up on the questions. So one of the questions, well, no, these are now comments. As I'm reading, I'm seeing comments. So
some of them are specific to a building, so we could certainly forward those to the principal for clarification.
And things. So what I'll do is I will try to get back to you as quickly as I can. We're at 148 now on the questions. I appreciate so many people. We still have a couple hundred people on the call, or almost 300 people still left on the call, and I appreciate your patience on this. So we're an hour and a half in. I thank you all for joining. I will continue to go through where we are with our questions. I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. If you have a question and it wasn't answered, please call my office at any point. I include my direct line into my office on my letterhead. So many of the emails that I send out, if it's on a letterhead other than just a quick email, you'll be able to get the direct line into my office, and you're welcome to call at any point, and I'm happy to have a conversation. If I answered your question, but I didn't fully answer your question, you're welcome to call as well. Please know that your children mean everything to us, and we want this to be as terrific of a year as possible. And I think we're on a good start so far. So I look forward to providing you more information as I know it. There's a Board of Education meeting on August 30th, and more information will follow. I hope we have some additional information from the state that can clarify some of the open questions that you have and that we still have as a school district. So, so Shay, I'm not sure if there's anything else that that we have.
We covered everything that we could answer at this point.
Okay, so we'll take a look at these questions here as best we can. We'll try to get back as quickly as we can for some of the for some of the questions that were posed here. So I appreciate you participating. Thank you so much to the 400 or 500 people or even plus who joined us tonight. And we look forward to providing you an update once we have more information to share. So thank you all. Have a good evening.
Good night.